viewpoints and beliefs presented on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the management, the affiliates and broadcast partners, or the sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Scarefest Radio, the radio you can see.
And welcome, everybody, to Scarefest Television. The original broadcast date, January 31st. The year of January is finally over, everybody. The year of January 2025 is officially over. We're getting ready to go into February, and you know what that means. Tickets go on sale. Chad Harlan returns this week as my co-host for the evening. Chad, the reason, of course...
issues.
It was he had trouble with his Zoom connection. He had to go to his phone. That's why he looks different. But Chad, Katie is celebrating her anniversary in Gatlinburg, which first of all, there is nothing more Kentucky than going to Gatlinburg to celebrate your anniversary. I wonder if she got the jacuzzi tub with the heart-shaped jacuzzi tub. Do they still have those down there?
I don't know about there. I went to a convention not long ago, and we went to a Days Inn that had a jacuzzi tub in the bedroom. So that was fun. So
I take it your wife didn't go with you.
She did. She
did. Okay. Well, then that's okay then. I just was thinking you and like Bert from accounting having to share a jacuzzi tub. That's the image.
Neither of us were touching the jacuzzi at the Days Inn.
I like Days Inn. I admit they're sometimes dated and not as clean as some other, but the rooms are always big and spacious and a good value. So it shows that you are. Yes, in the chat room, they've already recognized that I am wearing one of my Hawaiian shirts tonight. That's because it is not 0 degrees outside. It is no longer 0 degrees. It is, the official forecast is mud. So anyway, our guest tonight, we welcome Katherine Stringfield. And everybody on the Scarefest staff wanted to say Springfield, just so you know. I'm going to try not to make that mistake. Katherine, welcome to the show. And Katherine she's an author who wrote a book called The Mary Luck Tales. And it's about witchcraft. And you know that's one of our favorite topics on here. Joe will be on later with his review of Exorcist 3 and Legion, the director's cuts. And so that's what we got going on. Oh, and by the way, yes, there are 2 celebrity announcements tonight. 2 celebrity announcements. Brandon got me one at 8:30 in my defense. So that's what was going on there. So everybody, welcome to the chat room. Welcome on Instagram. Welcome on YouTube. And of course, as always, the main chat is on Facebook, and yes, we do monitor all Facebook chats. Katherine, first of all, tell us, now the concept of the seminar that you presented was basically the massive amounts of research into witchcraft and mountain folklore that you had to dig into to create this book. So first, let's start with, tell them about the book.
Okay. The book is called The Mary Luck Tales, Witch's Curse. And the name Mary Luck comes from an area in the little mining town of Oxford that I grew up in. And it was actually one of the first mines that was in the town, probably circa 1910. So I always loved that name. And when I was a kid, my papa would take me on walks. And we would always go through Mary Luck, and they had a pond, and it was just pretty area. And so that name always stuck with me. And there's an element to this book that's actually true, that actually happened to me when I was 13, that kind of scarred me for life and caused me to write the book, to be honest. growing up in Oxford, I mean, it was this tiny, you can't even call it a town. It was a mining community. We had a store, we had 2 churches and a school, post office. That was about it. And then all of the row houses built by the coal company. And once that went defunct in the mid 40s, you know, pretty much the town died around it. And we were left pretty much with a ghost town. That's the way I looked at it. So it was not a lot to do when I was a kid in the 80s. You know, our love for scary stuff. I mean, I loved horror movies from the get-go. And our grandfathers would tell us ghost stories in the evenings when they'd take their evening walk. And my papa was like notoriously the one. I mean, it was nothing for him to not just scare me to death on a daily basis. It was like he lived for that thrill. So anyway, the book, you know, takes place in this fictionalized town of Oxford, which I renamed Mary Luck. And you follow these kids from 1984, and you follow these kids through these trials and tribulations. It's a coming of age story mixed in with a lot of folklore and just the ghost stories that I grew up with. So that's why it's called the Mary Luck Tales, because the 3 kids stumble upon their town elders in like the old company store around the potbelly stove. And they're telling them the ghost stories that they usually tell them, but this time they're actually scary. They're not, you know, mincing the words. They're not sugarcoating it. It's actually scary. So these 3 friends, you know, come up with this plan to hide up in the loft of the company store. And so you get a tale from each old man. So you get this really true story that they're telling amongst each other.
Now, are
So
the, okay, from the book, the standpoint of the book, that the stories the men told in the book, were those stories based on stories you heard growing up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Mostly, well, I embellished.
Oh,
you know,
of course. You're an author. You're allowed to do that. You're expected to do that.
It's fiction. You know, I had to, you know, make my papa proud, you know, and say.
I guess what I really want to ask is, before I toss it over to Chad, on those stories that your grandfather told, take your embellishment out of it. Do you believe those stories?
Yes.
All right. Chad, over to you.
Catherine, it's a pleasure to talk to you tonight. I apologize for my technical issues and not being quite as professional as usual. But as I said when we first started talking earlier, before we went on the air, my wife's from Floyd County, right next to Oxford. And so I'm very interested to hear some of your background and some of the stories and myths and legends. But one of the things I noticed that I picked right up on in your bio is that you researched and looked into granny magic to prepare for this.
Yes.
It's a topic that's always very interesting to me. Again, my wife's from Eastern Kentucky. My family's from Whitesburg, so Letcher County.
Yes.
And I grew up running around those hollers too.
Right.
So I'm always interested to hear. Can you tell the people who are listening who may not know what granny magic is?
Granny magic is usually could be anybody from a wise woman, you know, that knows, you know, quick cures for things. Like when the settlers came over from, you know, through the Cumberland Gap and settled in the mountains of Eastern Kentucky, most of them were of Scottish and Irish descent. They came from North Carolina. Through the Cumberland Gap, they ended up settling over here. So they brought a lot of their customs and the ways of healing that they brought. And if you go back even further and look to see when these people actually came from Scotland and Ireland, they were being persecuted over there. They were killing people left and right for witchcraft, right? I mean, it went in the 15 and 1600s. I mean, there was thousands were killed, you know, women, just because they knew how to use an herb right, you know. So I think a lot of that, you know, came with them, you know, it was passed through the generations. And by the time they got to Eastern Kentucky, before the mining came in, these people were isolated and secluded. So like it was nothing for there to be one woman that could be the midwife, and you know, she knew all the cures, she knew how to do everything, and that was passed down and held within a family of people, and they were revered, you know, because there were no doctors there. You know, you were lucky to have somebody there that knew how to, you know, get a woman through childbirth. But from what I've researched and stuff, and just knowing growing up, I mean, I grew up, there was these two old ladies, and I loved them dearly, Mousy and Betty Jane. And they would come and get me when I was little, and they were like, let's go up on the hill behind the house, go get your poke, and we're going to go green picking. And they would tell me all of the greens and what they did, and, which ones you could eat, which mushrooms to stay away from, which berries not to pick, and they would bring me home with them. I mean, and I was like 4 or 5 years old, and I would go to their house and I would watch them cook down dandelion greens or, whatever, they'd have a mess of greens and I got to eat with them. But I mean, when I was little, I knew every herb and every tree and every, wild thing that you could eat outside and that was important because we played in the mountains. There was nothing else to do. So, a lot of us, probably survived our childhood because we knew those things. But as far as the granny witches, I mean, I make mine a bad witch in my story, but they weren't all that bad, but a lot of people lack power, right? And I found that, with the power of being the midwife and, giving you some clout in the town and the settlement, also you could be feared, if you didn't cross this lady, or you didn't do this to this family, because they were known to come up with potions, come up with charms, come up with any kind of tinctures and things like that. Like the Scottish travelers, which were like basically gypsies, they were called Scottish travelers. They would come through every now and then. And I have an instance in one of the stories in my book where that comes into play. So I don't know everything about those witches, but I am fascinated, absolutely fascinated by it.
I am too. Like I said, being from that area, I certainly had relatives that would be leaning that direction at least, and we're very reliant on the herbs and stuff from the earth to treat stuff before you thought about a doctor. And most of us, especially who are from that area, are one generation away from subsistence farming. I mean, the only reason after the coal camps started shutting down and before they came in there, the only reason anybody ate is they knew what was edible up in those hills.
Yes.
You could go gather it or grow it. And if you didn't know that and couldn't do that, so it's such an important skill at the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We are coming up on our first break. I'm going to go ahead and toss to that, and we'll be right back in just a minute.
Are you a fan of horror movies, books, comics, music, and collectibles? Room magazine is for you. Subscribe today to receive 6 or 12 print issues annually and join me, executive editor Andrea Civasati, on an ongoing journey through the horror genre of the past, present, and future. Plus, get access to unmissable special editions such as A Century of Witches, 50 Years of Gore Cinema, British horror movies, and so much more. Rue Morgue, the world's premier horror and culture and entertainment magazine since 1997. Accept no substitute.
And welcome back, everybody, to Scarefest Television. We're talking to Katherine Stringfield tonight about her book, The Mary Luck Tales. Mary Luck being the town. I'm going to say Mary Lux before the end of the night because it sounds like a person, but that's just me. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the folklore and superstition that you grew up with because I find this fascinating being a flatlander out here. Although, I mean, I grew up with some of, I guess you'd say we got the fringes of it over here in central Kentucky.
Yeah.
Now, cures. There was all kinds of, we all know there's all kinds of medicinal stuff for this, that, and the t'other. Are there any that you grew up with that you still embrace today?
Well, I mean, my mom, and I even almost did this evening because I've had this chest cold. I mean, whiskey and honey, for a cough.
Well, that's not superstitious.
I know.
At
I'm
worst,
just saying
that's a
a
time.
remedy. That's a remedy, of course. But now my dad said that when he was a kid, that his grandmother would put lamp oil on a wool sock and tie it around their neck. if they had like congestion, and that they would have to sleep with this wool
I had not
sock
heard that one.
that was dipped into lamp oil.
Yeah.
So,
Now I will say though, now I had heard about lamp oil for a lot of things. I remember when I was a kid. Apparently, it's a good disinfectant because I ran a nail through my foot, and I didn't go to the doctor. My mom soaked my foot in coal oil, kerosene, and I can still walk. Didn't lose a foot, so I guess it works.
yes,
But yeah, I had not. I don't believe I had heard soaking, if nothing else.
It sounds miserable.
It'll stop you from smoking. I'll bet you that.
It would probably stop you from a lot of things.
Okay. Now here's another thing. Now I've been following this kind of on TikTok. This is separate, but folds right into this. There apparently are some, to this day, some really dark superstitions about the Appalachian Mountains. Things you don't do in the dark. It seems like daytime, it's all butterflies and unicorns. But in the dark, that's when all the crap comes out. Now, I find this, I had no idea this was something beyond what you might tell the tourists to get them the hell out of your town. But with, Katie's in Gatlinburg. We took our honeymoon in Gatlinburg. I used to go camping all the time up in Shawnee, which is still part of the same mountain range.
Yes.
I had no idea that I shouldn't be these places after dark. But I find this fascinating. Are there any of those? I realize you're in Berea now, which is the big city compared to where you grew up. But, and also, interestingly, that's a place where the Bible Belt meets the pants, I guess is a good way to put it.
Right.
But are there, now what was some of those things that you grew up with? Things they told you just not to do?
Well, I know right now it's really trending on TikTok a lot about, if you hear your name called in the Appalachian Mountains, no, you didn't. Or if you hear whistling, no, you didn't.
Right,
Get in
that's
the
kind
house,
of things I'm talking about.
That kind of stuff. Honest to God, I don't ever remember hearing being told that, because I was always told you get your hunting in the house before it gets dark.
Yeah.
There was never an issue. The only thing we ever did one time, we took our city cousins snipe hunting one time. And this was when I was little, and I got to go and help my aunt that was going to take our boy cousins that they lived. Their dad was in the Army, so they had lived everywhere. They had never, actually lived in the mountains. And so they brought them to our house, and we were going to take them snipe hunting. And so they go out with their bag and their flashlight and, the whole shebang. So we ended up scaring the pants off of them with the snipe hunting thing, of course. But now, you didn't go out in the hills because there was actually bobcats. There was all kinds of creatures that you did not.
No, there's normal. That's like Shawnee Forest.
Normal stuff. Yes.
I found out we'd been camping there probably 20 years when I found out, oh, by the way, that's a Bigfoot hotspot. I had no idea. Now, admit, kind of like you alluded to, you don't go out after dark because you know why? It's dark. There are places that will kill you just for walking.
Yes, and there are no street lights in the mountains, okay?
Yeah, right.
You go to holler, there is not an arc sodium light that's going to come on and say, go home. No, no.
But
when that sun sinks behind the mountains and you can no longer see, you go home. It's like...
Well, to wrap this part of the questioning up, now you've got me curious. I wonder if that is a regional thing, deeper in the mountains, if you want to look at it that way, or if it's something that's kind of evolved, if you will, over the years from when, from the 80s to now. Cause I never heard any of that stuff back in the 80s and 90s when I was, going to the mountains. But now, like you said, it's all over TikTok now.
It's like, what? But no, the thing that happened to me that scared me to death when I was 13, the true story that happened was in broad daylight. Broad daylight.
That's something you can spoil, or is that part of the book?
It's part of the book, but I've told it many times, and I don't care to tell it if you want to hear it. Whatever you've got time for.
I got a few extra minutes here before I have to toss to Chad. Tell us the terrible, fearful, frightening story of what happened.
I'll break it down really quickly. When I was 13, me and my best friend, she got a crush on a boy. And the year before that, this was in July. So the Christmas before, my aunt had got me a Ouija board for Christmas. And it was the Parker Brothers version, that she probably went to Hex or TG&Y or one of those kind of stores and just grabbed a bunch of board games. And that's just the one that I ended up with, at Christmas. And my mama threw a fit because she's, old regular Baptist, Pentecostal. You didn't play with that stuff. She spoke in tongues. So it was a big deal, and I had no idea what a Ouija board was. I was like, what is this? What is, it's a game that doesn't work. I was kind of mad, So anyway, me and my cousin, my best friend, we figure out how to use it. And so we start going to all these slumber parties and we're the hit, and everybody's like, wow, and we were telling everybody's fortune with it. And, we were popular. So she gets a crush on this boy and we decide to invite him up to my house to, show off our Ouija board skills. Well, he's not buying it. He's like, that's every bit bullshit right there. No, you all are moving it. It's not real, So I was like, okay, let's go up on the hill behind the house. Cause I lived in the head of the holler, which meant if you've been at the holler, that's the last house. So the mountain makes like a horseshoe shape around my house. On the very top of that hill is our family cemetery. So I'm like, okay. So I holler in and tell my mom, I'm like, we're going up on the graveyard. She's like, all right, bye. And we go up there and I'm like, we're going to have a seance because this little boy had drowned in a pond across the hill. And so that's who we were going to try to bring back, And this boy, he's not buying any of it this whole time. He just thinks we're full of it. So we're sitting there and we're, getting in a circle and I'm explaining what a seance is, all of 13 years old and I know it all, And we asked for a sign, asked for this kid, nothing happens. And so I look over and that boy's just getting antsy. And so I grab everybody's hands and I'm like, any spirit that wants to come back, come back. And so it's like, as soon as I said it, this is July, it was hot. It was a clear blue day. Nothing spooky about it at all. And then all of a sudden we hear singing and it's like, where we were at a clearing in the middle of the hill right behind my house, there was a path that came around both sides, like from where we were at, wooded paths. And we heard singing, and it was like we all three instantly got scared, because, we've asked for a sign, and it's just this la, la, just like, what? And so I looked up and I could see something coming around that path across the way from us. And I was just instantly scared to death. Just petrified. We all three were, and we were still holding hands. And I remember finally when they got to where I could see them, they started coming through this like little gateway, and it was three little kids, and they looked like they were like 5 years old, and they were in these old clothes like from the 50s. The one in the back is pulling a red radio flyer wagon. Okay. And they're probably 20, 30 feet away from us. And they look as real as me and you. They weren't like specters or anything like that. And I was petrified. 5 years old, I was 13. And the little boy in the front had short red hair. He had on a striped t-shirt, blue jeans, had the cuffs rolled up really big. And this was in 1984. You didn't wear clothes like that. And when they got out, all three of them out of that little pathway and we're standing there, the little boy with the red hair goes, there they are. And pointed at us.
Oh, shit.
Well, we impressed that boy all to pieces. He beat dust. He was gone. He was out. He took off like a bullet. And I remember I was just in shock. I was just like, this isn't happening. Oxford was so tiny. There was 13 people in my 8th grade class. We knew every kid in town and we'd never seen these kids ever. And there, it was just wow. And so me and my friend finally, we get our senses and we take off running. And before we start to go down the hill, she's like, wait, let's see who they are. And I was like, well, you ask them, I've already raised them from the dead last year. And so she's like, hey, who are you? And that little boy in the front turned around and he was like, just this evil laugh. And just, they kept walking and they went around the rest of the hill. Like, it terrified me.
So they didn't fade off into nothingness. They just kept walking. Now, the great thing about this story is the way it sits now, you at the very least have a great story to tell.
Yes.
If they were real kids, they still have a great story to tell. He scared the hell out of a bunch of teenagers. If they're ghosts, it doesn't count.
Oh, no.
But yeah, I love that. Chad, over to you.
You talked about through that, the cemeteries in the backyard and And certainly I grew up in a similar situation and was around that quite a bit. What are some of the other, either in the book or out of the book, some of the other folklore of paints or monsters in the mountains that kind of influenced your interest in this?
My papa told me that story about a haint. He called it the haint, and it was one of his better creations. I'm sure he made it all up, but he had told me it was like right before Halloween, and he told me that there was a haint that lived up in the hill behind my house. There was like the top part of the hill, and then there's always that other cropping on top of that of some craggy hill over here. And he told me there was a cave up there, which there's not, because I've been on every inch of that hill and there's not one. But at that time, I didn't know that. But he told me there was a haint that lived there, and he only came out once a year on Halloween to snatch a kid, and he ate on them all year long. That was the thing. And then, like, if you were the one that got caught, you were the sacrifice, of course. But I mean,
so
he terrified me.
I got to interrupt. Did y'all did you notice one kid missing a year?
No. Not that I know of, but okay. I mean, he had me convinced, absolutely convinced that this was true. I mean, and so in book 2 of the Married Lake Tales, it's a trilogy. In book 2, the haint is a big character, and I do refer to him that way. And that all comes from my papa with that. But then, like, the monster thing, I came up with this just because it always freaked me out. The kudzu, kudzu's everywhere in the mountains. And I always thought when it got on the power lines and like the power poles and stuff like that, it to me looked like monsters. You could just see the gelatinous monsters. And so I have a scene in my book where those come to life. And wow. I call them the kudzu monsters. But, but as a kid, it always scared me. I don't know why. My papa hated the kudzu. He did everything in his power to get rid of it. He threw gasoline on it, tried to burn it. I mean, they did everything under the sun. You can't kill it. You just can't. Which that you're from. It's all that works. It's our background for everything now. But that was my thing, was the kudzu monsters.
We're at the bottom of the hour, so I'm going to hand it back over to Wes.
Okay.
Okay, everybody, if you're not aware of it, Scarefest lost an important cog in the wheel this past week. Our friend, he's been here around longer than I have, Jeff Cochran, passed away this week. He was the Scarefest master of costumes, and I just want to throw our condolences to his family and to say, Jeff, we are going to miss you.
Oh. So sorry.
Our celebrity announcement, first one of the evening, Heather Langenkamp. I want to say, I do not know why this person has been absent from Scarefest all of these years. Has she ever, in the chat room, has she ever been to Scarefest? I don't remember. Now, I missed a few years. I spent way too much time drinking and partying. I will admit it. But Heather Langenkamp is coming to Scarefest, one of our most requested stars. So definitely, of course, from the original and a couple of other installments, she made little pop-up appearances. But Heather Langenkamp is coming.
Nice.
And Vincent Craig Dupree, VC Dupree, is coming to Scarefest this year. We're announcing VC Dupree, Friday the 13th, Part 8. Was that Jason Takes Manhattan? I believe it was. Jason took something. I don't know. VC Dupree. Now, that's another one. I don't remember him being at Scarefest. So we've got some, well, I'm sure we're going to have a few posters show up to fill in some blanks that everybody has. Hey. February begins tomorrow. February 1st is tomorrow. The tickets go on sale. Adrian and Brandon claim that they are going to be sitting by their computers all day so that when things get jacked up, they'll be there to fix it. Seriously, VIP tickets, the returning VIPs, I think that goes on sale sometime tomorrow.
It says on the thing.
All tickets. No, okay. All tickets. See, you didn't let me finish. This is what women do to you. Okay, 7 p.m. And I shouldn't. Okay, how did they put it? Available VIP. In other words, they won't sell out, but so there'll be some VIP level tickets available at 7. But 7 p.m. everything goes on sale. So yes, the server will probably crash. But that's welcome to the internet. Returning vendor registration opens. Film festival submissions begin. This all happens tomorrow. February 1st is a big day in our history. February 15th, vendor registration actually opens. So tomorrow, February 1st, returning vendors, you'll be getting information on how to return to Scarefest. So watch that. Excuse me. And February 15th, that's your next big date on the calendar. And third weekend monthly pop-up and Hates Creek Neighborhood Fair. That's right. The Central Kentucky Mystical Market has moved to 1165 Center Parkway in Lexington. Google that, 1165 Center Parkway. But Kentucky's premier psychic and artist market is at a new location. Predictable dates, third weekend of every month. In February, it will be the 15th and 16th. A celebratory time to extend the love to yourself and others. So it's right around Valentine's Day. Get a reading, celebrate friendships, family. They've updated the Scarefest Weekend website. Go there, click the Central Kentucky Mystical Market link, and you can, if you don't remember this, you can find it there now. And don't forget the Raven Ball. Welcome to Nevermore. Join us for a night of mystery and intrigue as we celebrate all things Edgar Allan Poe. Put on your best Gothic attire and dance the night away to hauntingly beautiful music. The event will take place on Saturday, September 26, 2025, starting at 8 p.m. at a secret location. Get ready for a night of darkness and elegance that you won't soon forget. Don't miss out on this unforgettable evening. Tickets for that go on February 15th also. February 15th, that's when tickets start going on sale for the Raven Ball. You can find that on Facebook and at mysticlunaevents.com. mysticlunaevents.com. Now, back to our show. Katherine Stringfield talking about the Mary Luck Tale. Before I even get back into an actual interview, how'd your seminar go?
The seminar?
Yes.
At Scarefest?
Yes.
Yes, it went really well. Only thing was I was up against Clive Barker, which was next door to me. I was like, all these people are in the hallway. I was like, those people aren't here to see me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. Grant you that.
I'll tell you that. But no, everything. It was really fun. I had a good time. It was awesome. I couldn't believe I got picked. I was very flattered to be chosen to speak.
Not to downplay your submission, because it all sounds very, very interesting, and that's our main criteria when we read the application. Oh, that sounds interesting. But okay, here's the key, people, and this is how Katherine got in. She filled out the application correctly. You gave us all the information we needed to make a decision. We had one author that honestly would have made it, but they sent in like 4 applications with slightly varying information. And by the third one, I'm like, no, blackballed. I'm tired of reading about this person. So just say, she sent 1 application, done well, done correctly. Kudos to you.
Thank you.
Now, this is going back to your bio, or I shouldn't say it's not a bio, whatever, the description you gave for your seminar. Mm-hmm. Okay. Some things you mentioned in there. First of all, this was a term that, although it makes sense to me, I had never heard before. Witchfinder General. The Witchfinder General. Is that a real thing, or did you pull that out of your butt? Are you there? Oh.
No, that's an actual real thing. In Scotland, whenever all of the witch trials were happening, Mary Queen of Scots decided, that witches all had to be thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. So she pretty much deputizes this man called the Witchfinder General, and he uses the Maleficarum book as like a guide, and it went through like all of like old European countries, Germany. I mean, thousands and thousands of people, even men. It wasn't just women, it was men too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had torture devices they used to get confessions from these, poor women. I mean, they had these metal boot they would put on their foot, and they would twist the screws, and it was almost like thumb screws, but it was for your foot. And so by the time these women confessed and they dragged them out to the pyre to be burnt, I mean, they were shaved, they were poked, prodded, beaten. I mean, by this point, they could care less, And then they took it upon themselves that if they confessed, they would do them the kindness of strangling them before they were set on fire. But if you didn't confess, they just burnt you alive. They wanted to see you scream. But the Witchfinder General was an evil person. I mean, and he went under the guise of, I'm doing the Lord's work, but it was always the people they wanted out of their communities. Maybe it was an old woman that, had to have help from her neighbors. So, people were tired of taking care of her. So they're like, all right, she's a witch. Let's get rid of her. I mean, it was a way of, winnowing out the weak, I guess you could say.
Sounds cheaper
or
than
somebody just made you mad. And if you were considered a witch, I don't know if you know much about like the Salem witch trials, but Giles Corey was the man that was pressed to death, right? And he kept saying, more weight, more weight. He would not confess, because if he confessed, he lost his lands. And so his family lost their property and everything. So like he stood there for 3 days, took him 3 days to die, saying every time they were like, just confess, just confess. And he was like, no, more weight, bring it on. I mean, that's how bad it was. I mean, it was very, very crooked, very crooked.
Sounds cheaper than a lawyer in a divorce court, though.
Yes.
Okay, now this is going to be. I don't know if it was. You mentioned apparently in your seminar. What are some burial rituals that are mountain specific, if you will? You mentioned it, so I'm going to put you on the spot there, because to me, you dig a hole and you throw somebody in it. And
it's okay. Now, a lot of people, when someone died, you probably got laid out on your kitchen table, or they bring in a door and lay it out. And that's where the corpse was. The women in the town would wash the bodies. They would then, depending on how you died, like if they had to set up with you for a while, they would that's where the flowers and the herbs and stuff come in. It's to, mask the smell of death. And so a lot of times they used like netting and stuff to put over the body to keep insects, rodents, anything else like that off of the bodies. You were always carried out feet first, and you had to be buried. Let me make sure I get this right. Facing the east, so that when Jesus comes back, you can raise up and go with him.
I had not heard that. It makes perfect sense.
It does. I mean, a lot of these things make sense. I mean, it's like, you're like, okay, and the reason that they carried you out feet first is because if you were to turn around and look, like if the corpse were to be going out head first, they could look back into the house and their spirit could become trapped, like covering the mirrors with black cloths. You had to stop the clocks. You had to, what was the other one that I always found so fascinating? I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. But one of the stories in the book, which I can tell you this story really quick, because my teacher told me this in elementary school, and he was the greatest storyteller of all time, my 7th and 8th grade teacher. He talked all day long, and he would tell us stories that he was actually at a funeral, he said, as a kid, and the lady had died rather young. She was in her 30s, and they found her like on the floor somewhere, just like they thought she fell and hit her head and killed her. Well, she's in her coffin, right? They're sitting up with her. They were supposed to have buried her that day, but it rained too much. And so they had her out another night, and she sat up in her coffin that night. She was alive the entire time.
Well, that would
She
suck.
had been in a coma.
That would totally suck. Chad, over to you.
And so he said everybody took out running and screaming and, just going to pieces. But I mean, that happened a lot. It really did. A lot of people, the Saved by the Bell, people would tie strings around their finger and have it down to the coffin through the ground. And that way they would pay somebody in their wheel to set up their grave to make sure they weren't buried alive. That's where the, term comes from, Saved by the Bell. My uncle, when they built Jenny Wiley State Park, Dewey Lake is a man-made lake. And when they made that lake, they had to relocate all of those cemeteries. And they took the land on top of the hill behind my house, my papa's land, and they called it the Government Relocation Cemetery. And so all of the bodies from Jenny Wiley State Park for that is buried up on the hill behind my house. That's where I always thought those little kids came from. I thought that's where they, that's why they got up and left.
See,
but
now
anyway, that's another story.
But you ended the corpse sitting up story saying, "Oh, she was alive." Now, I actually have had someone who worked in a mortuary, funeral home, say that they'd been working on bodies and just had them sit the hell up, just a muscle spasm, and they said after the third or fourth time you get used to it. Okay, Chad, now over to you.
There's a reason why you set up with the dead, especially back then, and especially being from an old regular Baptist background too. You stay up overnight, and then you have a 3 or 4 hour funeral to make sure they have plenty of time to let you know if they're still around.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
In your seminar, you talk. You said you related spells and curses and how they relate to today's horror. Mm-hmm. So can you kind of give us a little, I guess preview's the wrong word since the seminar's already happened, but give us a little hint of what you talked about in that.
Well, there's been a big trend lately with, I guess, which was the one, Midsummer kind of started that whole thing with because when I grew up, we still celebrated May Day in Oxford. That was still a thing. And it's not really celebrated anymore, but it was, it's pagan, considered, pretty much pagan. And you know how that goes over back home. So, but, Oxford was, this little town that nobody paid any attention to. It was just kind of like we were forgotten. And as far as in today's horror, I've just seen that's been a theme now. It's it's going back to more of the ritualistic stuff, even as far as you could even say Outlander, because of I don't know if you're familiar with that show, but it's a time travel, she goes through the stones, on certain days of the year that are powerful. And I think a lot of that is coming back in today's horror, and people it's just a refreshing look at things. I think people got tired of the Saw and, Michael Myers and things like that, which I love that. Don't get me wrong, but I think there's something more creepy about something that's natural. It's more, you're gonna have a closer time of coming in contact with something like that than you are Michael Myers. You know what I'm saying? It's and I think that horror is becoming more in the realm of what the kids these days find scary. My daughter's 21, and she loves Midsummer. She loves all of that stuff. And I was like, that kind of reminds me of growing up, and it reminds me of, all of the, stories you heard from old women. My mom swears there was the lady that could make tables walk, over in Crawdad Bottom. She's like, I saw it happen. She said they would gather around her table and they would have seances and stuff, and I was like, I would have loved to have seen that, but I don't know. There's a lot in, what was that new movie? I'm trying to think. I can't think. Even The Witch, that newer movie, not the old one, but the new one. That one is a lot of the Salem stuff in that. But I don't know. I love at the ending of that, how that witch is in the, she is there, and it's that girl gets drawn out there, and I love it's just the nature of it. It's Mother Nature is a force to be reckoned with, and I think a lot of times using that in horror is good because it does make things seem more realistic. It's something that maybe could happen.
It's also interesting, just like there was a lot of movies that dealt with rituals and witchcraft before we got into the 80s slashers, and
yes,
and so it's kind of circling back around. It sounds like what you're talking about.
Right. The Wicker Man. Oh,
exactly.
The original Wicker Man.
But we're coming up right now on our last break, so I'm going to go ahead and toss that, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Okay.
Hey, Scarefest, it's Joe Lewis of Bonehead Weekly. I'm going to do something a little different because I actually really liked my review last week. So I'm going to try to be a little bit more excited about something I enjoyed watching that I wanted to revisit. Red Letter Media does these. They call them review. This movie came out in 1990. I saw it with my mom. I don't remember what time. It had been probably about a half a year to a year after my parents split up. And I was way too young for it, probably. Exorcist 3. Now, if you're a fan of The Exorcist, you would know that the original novel is written by a guy named William Peter Blatty. Well, William Peter Blatty had nothing to do with Exorcist 2. We're not going to talk about that. Neither did the director. What we're going to talk about is part 3, where William Peter Blatty not only wrote the novel, Legion, but also wrote the screenplay and directed the movie. And he directed another movie too that we really like, but we'll get into that later. Exorcist 3 carries over some of the characters, right? Like Detective Kinderman was in the original one, played by someone totally different. In this, he's played by George C. Scott. And Ed Flanders plays Father Dyer, who's also in the original one, and they're best friends. I'm not going to give you the plot because more than likely you've already seen it. And there's also 2 different versions of this movie. This movie's also famous for having one of the best jump scares of all time in any film history. And it is a pretty good one because the camera's sitting there for so long, and then it finally happens. If you've never seen The Exorcist 3, you really should, especially if you're a fan of the original Exorcist. Some of you are going to say, well, it's kind of weird and it's a little talky. The dialogue in this movie is excellent. In fact, probably the biggest flaw of the film is that William Peter Blatty directed his own script, which means there is a lot of great dialogue because he's a really good writer. In fact, he was a comedy writer. Believe it or not, The Exorcist made him a fortune, but it also ruined his comedy writing career. Detective Kinderman, played by George C. Scott, is investigating these murders happening around that are reminiscent or exactly like the Gemini killer that he caught and was eventually executed a few years before him. And there's a guy in a crazy ward who, for lack of a better way of putting it, played by Brad Dourif, and maybe one of the best Brad Dourif performances of all time, and that's saying something. If you don't know who that is, he's the voice of Chucky. Fantastic character actor, wonderful actor, and he just chews the scenery, and it's so good. And George C. Scott's really good, too. He's so angry. Kinderman is so angry and sad and hates the world. And basically, I can't give a lot away if you've never seen it, but it's a little bit of a mystery. There's 2 versions of this. And for years, they talked about the original director's cut because William Peter Blatty had to go back and reshoot the 3rd act, and they cut a lot out. And they finally, a few years ago, about 10 years ago, I think it was Shout Factory, put out a Blu-ray where you can actually watch from basically the video edit. So a lot of the put stuff back in looks pretty bad. You can watch the original intent. Now, Blatty, before he died, even said he still thinks he prefers the theatrical version better. I don't disagree. But you can find them both. The Exorcist 3 is on Peacock. It's also on Tubi. But if you're looking for the director's cut, which if you've never seen the director's cut and you're a huge fan of Exorcist 3 like I am, it's on Tubi as well. It also may be on YouTube. Check that out. There's a lot more with Brad Dourif as a Gemini killer. And it completely cuts out Jason Miller, who played the original Exorcist in the original movie, who when they went back to reshoot, they put him in. If you've never seen The Exorcist 3, take a minute. If you've got Peacock, watch it. And if you're a big fan of The Exorcist and Exorcist 3, watch the director's cut on this one. It's an interesting movie with a lot more dialogue. It's a little talky. You see why they cut it all out, and the endings are really abrupt, as opposed to the kind of exorcism ending in the theatrical cut. And I'm telling you, the theatrical cut is a more entertaining movie. However, if you're a big fan like I am, check it out. Watch Brad Dourif and George C. Scott go at each other a little bit more. This has been Joe Lewis of Bonehead Weekly.
And welcome back, everybody, to the final segment of Scarefest TV with our guest tonight, Katherine Stringfield, author of The Merry Luck Tales. Now, before we let you go, I do want to, everybody, you can actually type in those words, themerrylucktales.com, and find the website for the book. Tells you a little bit about it, and it just clicks you, and then you can link it, or it's available on Amazon. It's a long way of saying the book is available on Amazon if you want to play the home version. We've talked about burial rituals. Now I want to be cremated, but now Chad, I'm gonna put you in charge of this.
Absolutely. I got a lighter.
Well, it's not just that. I want you to fill my pockets with popcorn before I'm cremated. Can you handle that for me?
Just your pockets, or
yeah,
all the orifices?
Well, if whatever's available, I guess I'm cool with that. Katherine, what is okay? Now take the mountains out of the equation. Well,
Okay.
I mean, you can leave them in or take them out. It doesn't matter. But I want to know, because this is something that always fascinates me, especially around New Year's. What is your biggest superstition? Something that you know is total bullshit, but you still, to this day.
If a bird flies in the house, I start crying because somebody's going to die.
Well, shit, that was dark. That was...
Yes. That is the one, though. My husband, there was one day I came in the house and there was a bird flying in the house and I started crying. He's like, what's wrong? I was like, somebody's going to die. And he was like, what is wrong with you? And I was like, somebody's going to die. There's a bird in the house. He goes, well, I've never in my life. And I mean, and it never fails. It's happened every single time. I had a bird fly in my garage one time and my dog died that was in the garage.
Well, okay, now wait a minute. First of all, that escalated quickly. If you're going to spread it out where anyone and anything dies, then chances are you can find something or somebody that dies just all the time. And how much time period do you have it to observe it? Do they have to die immediately?
Well, like within a day or two.
Okay.
Or death comes in threes. I do believe that too.
I think that's another one. I think that's something that we notice.
Yes.
In other words, I don't really think I understand. I always say that too, and I've heard that many, many times. But I can't. I pointed this will be the third time I pointed this out. All the drones are flying over New Jersey, and it makes the news, and then all of a sudden the drones are all over the country, and I think it's because everybody else started looking up.
Yes.
Yeah. So in words, they were already there. Everything you're seeing was already there, whether they're aliens or kites or whatever they are. But now we're looking up.
Yes.
I believe if I had noticed the pattern that every time a bird flew in my house, somebody died, I checked the screens pretty often.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, it happened one time, and then ever since then, it just stuck with me. And I know it's irrational and it's stupid, and I know
I've heard
better.
that my whole life too.
Out of my head.
See, now what I've heard is if a bird flies in my house, a bird will die.
The bird will die.
So.
Well,
Yeah, we have cats now. So also we might lose a dish or a bookshelf or their latest casualty is we have had one of those wire. I live in a 100-year-old house, so the closets were an afterthought, and the bedroom closet did not have a shelf, so I put up one of those nice little Lowe's Big Lots, well, not Big Lots, Home Depot wire shelves for the shelf. Well, the cats figured out if you bounce on it enough, it will come down, and so it came crashing down last week
in the middle of the night.
Yeah, so we have a closet pile of clothes now. We don't just have our normal piles of clothes; we have a closet pile of clothes. So.
Wow.
So,
as we wrap up, I do have one last question. Is there anything else you have coming out that you want to tell everybody about?
Yes. Book 2. This is book 1. It's a trilogy, and book 2, I finished. It's in the editing phases, and I spoke with my publisher at Martin Sisters, Melissa Newman, and she said that I could for sure say it'll be out June 1st.
Oh, so that's not long.
I'm excited. It's called The Merry Luck Tales also, but it's called To Hell and Back. And so if you get to the end of the first one, there is quite a cliffhanger, which I got fussed at quite a bit about. But I was like, hold on, there's more coming. But it's called Mary Luck Tales to Hell and Back. So it's going to take off exactly where book 1 ends, and then it'll go on, and then we're going to be working on book 3 this summer. So hopefully it'll be out by Halloween, and we'll have all 3 of them. So yes, that is my plan for sure.
And I'm sure they will all be linked at themarylucktales.com.
Yes, they will. Yes, they will.
Well, everybody, I want to thank you for tuning in to Scarefest TV tonight. I want to remind you, Heather Langenkamp, Vincent
Yay!
Craig Dupree were our announcements tonight, because everybody claimed, for some reason, everybody joins the show exactly 30 seconds after I make the announcements. So I'm just going to recap that. If I had a nickel for every time somebody came, I missed the announcements, I'd have a bunch of nickels. So anyway, thank you. Next week, of course, is our council episode with Adrian and Brandon. So you'll be able to tune in and find out how things are going on the ticket sale / booking / whatever the hell we'll be talking about. I do know that the center threw us a bit of a curveball this last week. I don't know how much of that we'll be able to talk about. But in other words, yeah, anybody says this is a money grab. All right. So, see you next time. Thanks, Catherine.